What shall I tell them?
You will tell them that you are cousin Michael from Kiev, and you will say that all the Vorobyanovs are dead, and that you are willing to pay hard rubles for something to remember them by.
Cousin Michael from Kiev, all the Vorobyanovs are dead.
I am cousin Michael from Kiev, all the Vorobyanovs are dead.
Yes?
I am cousin Kiev from Vorobyanov. All the Michaels are dead.
What? What can I do for you?
I am cousin Chair!
Ippolit Matveyevitch felt a hotness in his palms and a sinking feeling in his stomach. A stranger with a kindly face was coming straight towards him, carrying a chair by the middle like a cello. Suddenly developing hiccups, Ippolit Matveyevitch looked closely at the chair and immediately recognized it. Yes, it was a ham's chair upholstered in flowered English chintz, somewhat darkened by the storms of the Revolution. It was a walnut chair with curved legs. Ippolit Matveyevitch felt as though a gun had gone off in his ear. "Knives and scissors sharpened, razors set," cried a baritone voice nearby. And immediately came the shrill echo, "Soldering and repairing. Moscow News, Magazine Giggler, Red Meadow." Somewhere up above, a glass pane was removed with a crash. A truck from the Grain Mill and Lift Construction Administration passed by, making the town vibrate. A militiaman blew his whistle. Everything brimmed over with life. There was no time to be lost. With a leopard-like spring, Ippolit Matveyevitch leaped towards the repulsive stranger and silently tugged at the chair. The stranger tugged the other way. Still holding on to one leg with his left hand, Ippolit Matveyevitch began forcibly detaching the stranger's fat fingers from the chair. "Thief!" hissed the stranger, gripping the chair more firmly. Just a moment," mumbled Ippolit Matveyevitch, continuing to unstick the stranger's fingers. A crowd began to gather. 3 or 4 people were already standing nearby, watching the struggle with lively interest. They both glanced around in alarm and, without looking at one another or letting go the chair, rapidly moved on as if nothing were the matter. "What's happening?" wondered Ippolit Matveyevitch in dismay. What the stranger was thinking was impossible to say, but he was walking in a most determined way. They kept walking more and more quickly until they saw a clearing scattered with bits of brick and other building materials at the end of a blind alley. Then both turned into it simultaneously. Ippolit Matveyevitch's strength now increased fourfold. "Give it to me!" he shouted, doing away with all ceremony. "Help!" exclaimed the stranger almost inaudibly. Since both of them had their hands occupied with the chair, they began kicking one another. The stranger's boots had metal studs, and at first Ippolit Matveyevitch came off badly. But he soon adjusted himself and, skipping to the left and right as though doing a Cossack dance, managed to dodge his opponent's blows, trying at the same time to catch him in the stomach. He was not successful since the chair was in the way, but he managed to land him a kick on the kneecap, after which the enemy could only lash out with one leg. "Oh, Lord!" whispered the stranger. It was at this moment that Ippolit Matveyevitch saw that the stranger who had carried off his chair in the most outrageous manner was none other than Father Theodore, priest of the Church of St. Frol and St. Lawrence. "Father!" he exclaimed, removing his hands from the chair in astonishment. Father Vostrakov turned purple and finally loosened his grip. The chair, no longer supported by either of them, fell onto the brick-strewn ground. "Where's your moustache, my dear Ippolit Matveyevitch?" asked the cleric as caustically as possible. "And what about your curls? He used to have curls, I believe." Ippolit Matveyevitch's words conveyed utter contempt. He threw Father Theodore a look of singular disgust and, tucking the chair under his arm, turned to go. But the priest had now recovered from his embarrassment and was not going to yield Vorobyaninov such an easy victory. With a cry of, "No, I'm sorry," he grabbed hold of the chair again. Their initial position was restored. The two opponents stood, clutching the chair and, moving from side to side, sized one another up like cats or boxers. The tense pause lasted a whole minute. "So you're after my property, Holy Father," said Ippolit Matveyevitch through clenched teeth, and kicked the Holy Father in the hip. Father Theodore fainted and viciously kicked the marshal in the groin, making him double up. "It's not your property." "Whose then?" "Not yours." "Whose then?" "Not yours." "Whose then? Whose?" Spitting at each other in this way, they kept kicking furiously. "Whose property is it then?" screeched the marshal, sinking his foot in the Holy Father's stomach. "It's nationalized property," said the Holy Father firmly, overcoming his pain. "Nationalized?" "Yes, nationalized." They were jerking out the word so quickly that they ran together. "Who nationalized it?" "The Soviet government, the Soviet government." "Which government?" "The working people's government." "Aha," said Ippolit Matveyevitch icily. "The government of workers and peasants?" "Yes." Then maybe you're a member of the Communist Party, Holy Father." "Maybe I am." Ippolit Matveyevitch could no longer restrain himself, and with a shriek of "maybe you are," spat juicily in Father Theodore's kindly face. Father Theodore immediately spat in Ippolit Matveyevitch's face, and also found his mark. They had nothing with which to wipe away the spittle, since they were still holding the chair. Ippolit Matveyevitch made a noise like a door opening, and thrust the chair at his enemy with all his might. The enemy fell over, dragging the panting Vorobyaninov with him. The struggle continued in the stalls. Suddenly there was a crack, and both front legs broke on simultaneously. The opponents completely forgot one another and began tearing the walnut treasure chest to pieces. The flowered English chintz split with the heartrending scream of a seagull. The back was torn off by a mighty tug. The treasure hunters ripped off the sacking together with the brass tacks, and, grazing their hands on the springs, buried their fingers in the woolen stuffing. The disturbed springs hummed. 5 minutes later the chair had been picked clean. Bits and pieces were all that was left. Springs rolled in all directions, and the wind blew the rotten padding all over the clearing. The curved legs lay in a hole. There were no jewels. "Well, have you found anything?" asked Ippolit Matveyevitch, panting. Father Theodore, covered in tufts of wool, puffed and said nothing. "You crook!" shouted Ippolit Matveyevitch. "I'll break your neck, Father Theodore." "I'd like to see you," retorted the priest. "Where are you going, all covered in fluff?" "Mind your own business." "Shame on you, Father. You're nothing but a thief." "I've stolen nothing from you." "How did you find out about this? You exploited the sacrament of confession for your own ends." "Very nice, very fine." With an indignant "Pfui," Ippolit Matveyevitch left the clearing, and, brushing his sleeve as he went, made for home. At the corner of Lena Massacre and Yeregeyev streets he caught sight of his partner. The technical advisor and director general of the concession was having the suede uppers of his boots cleaned with canary polish. He was standing half-turned with one foot slightly raised. Ippolit Matveyevitch hurried up to him. The director was gaily crooning the shimmy. "The camels used to do it, the barracudas used to dance it, now the whole world's doing the shimmy." "Well, how was the housing division?" he asked in a businesslike way, and immediately added, "Wait a moment, don't tell me now, you're too excited. Cool down a little." Giving the shoeshiner 7 kopecks, Ostap took Vorobyaninov by the arm and led him down the street. He listened very carefully to everything the agitated Ippolit Matveyevitch told him. Small black beard, right, a coat with a sheepskin collar, I see. That's the chair from the pensioners' home. It was bought today for 3 rubles. But wait a moment. And Ippolit Matveyevitch told the chief concessionaire all about Father Theodore's low tricks. Ostap's face clouded. "Too bad," he said. "Just like a detective story, we have a mysterious rival. We must steal a march on him. We can always break his head later." As the friends were having a snack in the Stenka Raisin beer hall, and Ostap was asking questions about the past and present state of the housing division, the day came to an end. The golden cart horses became brown again. The diamond drops grew cold in midair and plopped onto the ground. In the beer halls and Phoenix restaurant, the price of beer went up. Evening had come. The street lights on Greater Pushkin Street lit up, and a detachment of pioneers went by stamping their feet on the way home from their first spring outing. The tigers' figures of victory and cobras on top of the province planning administration shone mysteriously in the light of the advancing moon. As he made his way home with Ostap, who was now suddenly silent, Ippolit Matveyevitch gazed at the tigers and cobras. In his time, the building has housed the provincial government, and the citizens had been proud of their cobras, considering them one of the sights of Stargorod. "I'll find them," thought Ippolit Matveyevitch, looking at one of the plaster figures of victory. The tigers swished their tails lovingly, the cobras contracted with delight, and Ippolit Matveyevitch's heart filled with determination.
Our plan included a journey across the entire continent, from ocean to ocean. That was fine, but essentially a quite indefinite plan. We had made it up to Moscow and had discussed it ardently all the way to America. We paced scores of kilometers over the decks of the Normandy, arguing about the details of that journey and dousing each other with geographic nomenclature. At dinner, drinking the pure but weak wine from the cellars of the General Transatlantic Company, we muttered almost senselessly, California, Texas, or something equally beautiful and enticing. But when we stepped onto American soil, everything proved not so simple or romantic. The plan was astounding because of its simplicity. We were to arrive in New York, buy an automobile and ride until we arrived in California. Then we would turn around and ride until we arrived in New York. It was all simple and wonderful, like an Andersen fairy tale. Tra-la-la sounds the klaxon, true-loo-loo sounds the motor. We ride across the prairie, we swing over mountain chains, we quench the thirst of our trusty machine with the icy water of the Cordilleras, and the great Pacific sun casts its blinding brilliance on our tanned faces. In short, you can see for yourself that we were a bit touched. In the first place, Texas is not called Texas, but Texas. But that was only half the trouble. On the fifth day, the decks of the steamer were filled with suitcases and trunks, unloaded out of the cabins. The passengers moved to the right side and, holding on to their hats, avidly peered into the horizon. The shore was not yet visible, but New York's skyscrapers were already rising out of the water like calm pillars of smoke. An astounding contrast, this, after the vacant ocean, suddenly the largest city in the world. In the sunny smoke dimly gleamed the steel extremities of the 102-storied Empire State Building. On the left side was the small green Statue of Liberty. Then suddenly it was on the right side. We were being turned around, and the city turned around us. Finally, it stopped in its tracks, impossibly huge, thunderous, and quite incomprehensible as yet. We had not informed anyone of our impending arrival, and no one met us. We waited under our letters for the customs clerk. Finally he came. He was a calm and unhurried man. He was in no way affected by us having crossed an entire ocean in order to show him our suitcases. He politely touched the upper layer of our belongings and did not look any further. When we finally freed ourselves, it was already evening. A white taxicab with 3 gleaming lanterns on its roof, looking like an old-fashioned carriage, took us to the hotel. Our attempt to take a look at New York from an automobile failed. We drove through quite dark and dreary streets. From time to time something rumbled hellishly under our feet, or something else thundered overhead. Whenever we stopped before the traffic lights, the sides of the automobiles that stood beside us hid everything from view. The chauffeur turned back several times and asked again for the address. It seemed that he was somewhat anxious about our English. Now and then he would look at us patronizingly, and his face seemed to say, "Never mind, you won't get lost. Nobody ever got lost in New York." We liked the room, but we did not pause to explore it. Hurry into the street, the city, the tumult. We threw our overcoats on the couch, ran out into the narrow corridor covered with a patterned carpet, stepped into the elevator, and the elevator, clicking softly, flew down. We looked at each other significantly. After all, this really was a great event. For the first time in our lives, we were about to walk in New York. At once a slight misfortune befell us. We thought we would walk slowly, looking around attentively in order to study, to observe, to take in, and so forth. But New York is not one of those cities where people move slowly. The people who passed us did not walk, they ran. And so we, too, ran. From that moment on, we could not stop. We spent a whole month in New York, and throughout that time we were constantly racing somewhere at top speed. Simultaneously, we acquired such a businesslike and preoccupied air that John Pierpont Morgan Jr. himself might have envied us. At our rate of speed, he would have earned approximately $60 million during that month. We earned somewhat less. We stood at the most popular corner in the States, at the corner of 42nd and Broadway. The Great White Way, as Americans call Broadway, stretched before us. Here, electricity has been brought down, or brought up, if you like, to the level of a trained circus animal. Here it has been forced to make faces, to hurdle over obstacles, to wink, to dance. Edison's sedate electricity has been converted into Duroff's trained seal. The surge of Broadway carried us several times back and forth and flung us into a side street. We walked again through some slums and again did not know where we were. Young men in light-coloured hats crowded around drugstores exchanging curt phrases. Their manner was exactly like that of the young men in Warsaw who populate Krasnal Street. In Warsaw, a gentleman from Krasnal is not considered exactly God's precious little lamb. It is sheer luck if he turns out to be merely a thief, for he might be something much worse than that. Late at night we returned to our hotel, not yet disappointed with New York, nor elated over it, but rather disturbed by its hugeness, its wealth, and its poverty. We left the hotel to lunch somewhere, and soon found ourselves on 42nd Street. During our first days in New York, no matter where we were bound for, we invariably landed on 42nd Street. Over the large show window of a corner store, despite the sunny morning, gleamed the blue letters, Cafeteria, in electric lights. Generally speaking, New York is remarkable because it has everything. There you can find the representatives of any nation, secure any dish, any object from an embroidered Ukrainian shirt to a Chinese stick with a bone handle in the shape of a hand, which is used for back scratching. From Russian caviar and vodka to Chilean soup and Italian macaroni. There are no delicacies in the world that New York cannot offer. But for all of it, one must pay in dollars. And we want to talk about the preponderant majority of Americans who can pay only cents. The splendid organization of the restaurant business seems to confirm that. Model cleanliness, good quality of produce, an extensive choice of dishes, a minimum of time lost in dining. All that is so. But here is the trouble. All this beautifully prepared food is quite tasteless, colourless in taste. It is not injurious to the stomach. It is most likely even of benefit to it, but it does not present man with any delights, any gustatory satisfaction. For a long time we could not understand why American dishes, so appetizing in appearance, are so unappealing in taste. At first we thought the Americans simply do not know how to cook, but then we learned that that alone is not the point. The crux of the matter is in the organization itself, in the very essence of the American economic system. Americans eat a blindingly white, but utterly tasteless bread, frozen meat, salty butter, unripe tomatoes, and canned goods. Near New York we saw waste places overgrown with weeds, forsaken plots of earth. No one sowed grain there, no one raised cattle there. You see, we were told, it simply would not pay. We cannot compete here with the monopolists from the West. Somewhere in Chicago, in the slaughterhouses, they kill cattle and transport the meat throughout the country in frozen form. From somewhere in California, they ship frozen chickens and green tomatoes which are supposed to ripen in transit, and no one dares to challenge the mighty monopolists to a fight. Sitting in a cafe, we read Mikoyan's speech, which said that food in a socialist country must be palpable, that it must bring joy to people. And it sounded like poetry to us. While in America the business of feeding people, as any other business, is built on this single consideration: does it pay or does it not pay? Therefore people eat frozen meat, salty butter, and unripe tomatoes. Some businessman discovers that it pays to sell chewing gum, so people are taught to chew this cud. All the while we were there, we felt an irresistible desire, common to all Soviet people, to complain and to offer suggestions. We wanted to write to the Soviet control, and to the party control, and to the Central Committee, and to Pravda, but there was no one to complain to, and there is no such thing in America as a book of suggestions. The American writer Ernest Hemingway, author of the recently published Fiesta, which evoked much discussion in Soviet literary circles, happened to be in New York while we were there. His permanent home is at Key West, a small town at the extreme southern tip of Florida. He proved to be a large man with mustaches and a peeling sunburnt nose. He wore flannel trousers, a woolen vest which did not come together on his mighty chest, and his bare feet were in house slippers. We stood together in the middle of one of the hotel rooms in which Hemingway lived, engaged in the usual American occupation. In our hands were high and wide glasses of highballs, whiskey mixed with water. So far as we have been able to observe, everything in America begins with a drink. We happened to talk of Florida, when Hemingway at once passed to what seemed to be his favourite theme. During your automobile journey, don't fail to visit me at Key West. We'll go fishing there. And with his arms he showed us the size of a fish one can catch at Key West. That is, like every fisherman, he spread his arms as far apart as he could. The fish must have been about the size of a sperm whale. We bought a new Ford. At first we wanted to buy a Ford with a radio set, but we were dissuaded by a terrible story. Not long ago an accident occurred. In the mountains an automobile was smashed. The wounded people lay in it for several hours under the sound of foxtrots broadcast by the surviving radio set. After hearing that, we refused to buy a radio. The machine glided over the damp asphalt of Central Park West. The speedometer began to register miles. We started on our long trek. The proud towers of New York were behind us. Framed in stainless steel, the facets of the Empire State Building shone in the morning murkiness, hovering over the gigantic city. Now we were driving through a lively and unpretentious suburb. Muddy water ran over the pavement, which was lined with parallel strips. The high-strung people of New York raced in their automobiles on their sundry errands. In a red brick house, toasted sandwiches were sold. As a matter of fact, all the houses here were brick and all were red. What can one like here? What can one learn to love here? Like all the large cities of the world, New York is an appalling city. Here millions of people bravely struggle for mere existence. There is too much money in this city. Some people have too much while others have too little. And it is this that casts a tragic light on all that happens in New York. We parted from the city for 2 months. The roads, like the roads of ancient Rome, are built practically for all eternity. Among the millions of automobiles flying from ocean to ocean, we too were a grain of dust, chased by a gasoline storm which has been raging for ever so many years over America. Our machine raced past rows of gasoline stations, each of which had 6, 8, or even 10 red or yellow pumps. We stopped in a small town and dined in a drugstore. It is necessary to explain here the nature of a small American town, and what sort of drugstore it is in which one may dine. When America's big businessmen in search of profit directed their attention to the drug business, They were first of all curious to find out what pharmacists were really doing behind their partitions. What were they grinding there with their pestles in those thick china mortars while frowning importantly? Was it medicine? Well, now, how many medicines are there in the world? Let's say 50, 100, well 120 at the most. Why then prepare them in an amateur way in drugstores? They should be produced in mass quantities in factories. The fact that medicines began to be prepared in factories didn't make it any easier for the sick man. The medicines were no cheaper. But the pharmacists lost their income. That was taken over by the drug manufacturers. To recoup their lost incomes, the outsmarted pharmacists began to sell ice cream, thirst-quenching waters, small notions, toys, cigarettes, kitchen utensils. In a word, they went in for anything at all. And so the present-day American drugstore is a large bar. Although the drugstore has been long ago converted into an eating establishment, its proprietor is nevertheless obliged to be a pharmacist and have a certain baggage of learning, which is insistently indispensable while serving coffee, ice cream, toasted bread, and other drugstore merchandise. America is predominantly a country of one-story and two-story houses. The majority of the American population live in small cities where the population is 3, 5, 10, 15,000. Every small town wants to be New York. There are New Yorks of 2,000 population, there are New Yorks of 1,800. We even found one New York consisting of 900 inhabitants, and it was a real city. Its inhabitants walked on their Broadway, their noses high in the air. The architecture of the buildings in the principal street cannot present the eye with artistic delights. It consists of brick, the frankest kind of brick, laid in two-story cubes. Here people make money, so there is no room for artistic embellishments. Many of the rebellious writers of America have come from the small towns of the Middle West. Theirs is the revolt against sameness, against the deadly and futile quest of the dollar. Some of the towns make heroic efforts to distinguish themselves from their brethren of the same type. Signs are hung at the entrance to the town, quite, let us say, like signs over the entrance to a store, so that the customer may know what is being sold where. Redwood City, and under, in verse, is written, "Climate Best, by Government Test." Here they trade in climate. The climate may be the best, but the life is the same as in the cities that have no splendid climate. An automobile journey across America is like a journey across an ocean, monotonous and magnificent. Whenever you go out on deck, in the morning or in the evening, in a storm or a calm, on a Monday or a Tuesday, you will always find water, of which there is no end. Whenever you look out the window of an automobile, there will always be an excellent smooth road, with gasoline stations, tourist houses, and billboards on the side. You saw all this yesterday, and the day before, and you know that you will see the very same thing tomorrow, and the day after. And the dinner in the state of Ohio will be the same as yesterday's when you pass through the state of New York. It is in this consistent sameness that the colossal dimensions and the incalculable wealth of the United States are expressed. Before saying about Eastern America that this is a mountainous or a desert or a forest land, one wants to say the main thing, the most important thing about it. It is the land of automobiles and electricity.
Hope you enjoyed the video. Just a quick reminder that there is a special game of Call of War for you to try out. Click the link in the description to find out more and immerse yourself in this very detailed world. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. In America, one is free to profess any view, any belief. One is a free citizen. However, let the American try not to go to church, or let him try to praise communism, and something will happen whereby he will stop working in the big little town. He himself will not even notice how it happened. The people who will get rid of him themselves do not believe in God, but they go to church. As for communism, well, that is something for Mexicans and Slavs. It is no business for Americans. Imagine this. You take an immense mountain chain, cut it at the root, turn it upside down and push it onto even land, covered with forests. Then you take it out. What remains is the mold of a mountain chain. Its mountains are upside down. That is the Grand Canyon. Mountains must be looked at from below, the canyon from the top down. The spectacle of the Grand Canyon does not have its equal anywhere on Earth. Of course, we should have gone down to the bottom of the canyon and lived there for half a year in a log cabin with steam heating. But we only did what we could. Drove around the canyon in an automobile. Out of the Grand Canyon there was a new road, untravelled yet by tourists. The tall, thick forests of the national park became gradually thinner, and finally disappeared altogether. It suddenly turned dark and cold. We ran out of petrol. We were hungry. When immediately, from around the bridge, a light gleamed, and we drove up to a house. Near the little house we noticed, with a sigh of relief, a petrol station. The house represented what in Russian and in Spanish is called a rancho, but in English, a ranch. So, here in the desert, where for 200 miles around there is not a single settled habitation, we found excellent beds, electric lights, steam heat, hot and cold water. We found all the conveniences of any house in New York. This little house contains all of American life, complete comfort in a desert, side by side with the pauper wigwams of the Indians. No matter where you go as a traveller, to the north, to the south or the west, or to New York, New Orleans or New Jersey, you will see everywhere poverty and riches stand hand in hand at all the roads and at all the bridges of this great country. This video is sponsored by Magellan TV, the documentary streaming service. Quick update from Coco. She's been very busy recently working on her new documentary for Magellan. A fascinating exploration of the birds that fly around outside our window and go into the bathroom just outside the litter box. Yeah, I know that was you. But to tide you over before Coco finishes her masterpiece, her recommendation this week is The Last Tsarinas, which delves into the world that disappeared to make way for our Soviet tourists, Ilf and Petrov. As always, Magellan offers great context to our content. It's a sort of Netflix for documentaries with a huge range of great history stuff among loads of other genres, much of which is available in 4K. Click on the link in the description for an exclusive month-long free trial for Voices of the Past viewers. Thanks. Here began the reservation of a nomad Indian tribe, the Navajo. This is one of the largest Indian tribes. It consists of 60,000 people. The Navajos loathe and detest their white-faced brothers, who have been exterminating them for 2 centuries, driving them into worse and worse places, and finally into a fruitless desert. The government, which formerly devoted itself to destroying the Indians, is now trying to preserve their small number of descendants. So-called Indian reservations have been built where the whites are permitted to trade with the Indians under state control. Having chased the Indians away from the fertile ground, they have reserved for them only a few pathetic parcels of desert, and this is regarded as a great act of benevolence. They have opened museums of Indian art. They buy from the Indians for a pittance their drawings, rug, painted clay bowls and silver bracelets. Americans are rather proud of the Indians. Even so does the director of a zoo take pride in a rare old lion. On the border of California, we were stopped at the inspector's station. It is forbidden to transport fruit or flowers into California. The inspector pasted on our windshield a label portraying unnaturally blue vistas and green palms, and we found ourselves in California, in the Golden State. "California?" cried Mr. Adams suddenly.
is a remarkable state. As a matter of principle, there is never any rain here. You will simply insult a Californian if you tell him that rain is possible here. If on the day of your arrival it rains anyway, the Californian will be very angry, will shrug his shoulders and say, "This is something incomprehensible. I have been living here for 20 years. One of my wives died here, and another fell ill. Here my children grew up and graduated from high school. This is the first time I have seen rain." He laughed. Americans laugh and never stop showing their teeth, not because something humorous has happened to them, but because laughter is their style. America is a land that loves explicitness in all its affairs and ideas. It is better to be rich than to be poor. So instead of wasting time on thinking of the causes of poverty and eliminating them, the American tries in every possible way to acquire $1 million. It is better to laugh than to weep, so he laughs. No doubt in the past he has forced himself to laugh, just as he forced himself to sleep with the windows open, to indulge in gymnastics and to brush his teeth. Subsequently, these things become daily habits. And now, laughter rattles in his throat, irrespective of his circumstances or his wishes. If you see a laughing American, it does not mean that something strikes him as comical. He laughs only because an American must laugh. We were rolling over the streets of San Francisco. This is the most beautiful city in America, apparently because it is in no way reminiscent of America. Most of its streets rise from hill to hill. An automobile journey through San Francisco looks more like a sideshow called American Mountains and presents the passenger with a number of strong sensations. Nevertheless, in the center of the city is a piece which looks like the flattest Leningrad in the world, with its squares and broad avenues. The other parts of San Francisco form a remarkable seashore mixture of Naples and Shanghai. Here, as everywhere else in America, was limitless wealth and limitless poverty standing side by side, shoulder to shoulder. But wealth here did not seem as depressingly monotonous and dull, while poverty was at least picturesque. We drove towards the Golden Gate. Here ends Lincoln Highway, the autostrada between New York and San Francisco. American technicians are people of amazing modesty. The end of their concrete masterpiece which unites the Atlantic and the Pacific Oceans they have marked with a memorial column only 3 feet high, on which are the letter L, a small bronze bas-relief of Lincoln, and the inscription, "The western end of the Lincoln Highway." The names of the builders of the road remain unknown, and what of it? The people who a year from now will be driving across the bridges of San Francisco Bay will not know who planned and built them. Thanks to the kindness of the bridge builders, we were granted permission to look at their work. The San Francisco-Oakland Bridge, 8.5 miles long, consists of several bridge spans of different types. Now they were finishing the spinning of the steel cable on which the bridge will hang. Its thickness is almost 1 meter in diameter. That cable, hanging over the bay, is safely provided with a wire net for the workmen to walk on. We ventured to make a short journey along the cable. We felt as if we were on the roof of a skyscraper, with only this difference, that there was nothing at all under our feet, except a thin wire through which the waves of the bay were visible. A strong wind was blowing. Although the journey was quite safe, we clutched the cable with desperation. "How thick it is," said Mrs. Adams, our travelling partner, trying not to look down. "A beautiful cable," confirmed Mr. Adams, her husband, without letting the upper steel support out of his hands. "And now let us go higher," the guide proposed, "to the very top of the pylon." "What a cable!" Mr. Adams exclaimed. "I simply don't want to go away from it." "But we don't have to go away from it. We will go up alongside the cable," the guide said. No, in this particular place the cable is especially good." Mr. Adams looked down by chance and instantly shut his eyes. "An excellent, excellent cable," he muttered. "Write that down in your little books."
Just as, long ago, thousands of cities, a score of deserts, and a score of states ago, we had been almost sucked in by New York. Our notebooks were filled with a multitude of notes, signifying the dates of business appointments, of business luncheons, and business cocktail parties. We were leading the life of business-like Americans, without having any business at all. Our free day was finished by a visit to a football match. The teams of two universities were playing, Santa Clara and Texas Christian. But before passing to a description of this event, which to some extent helped us to understand the nature of America, it is necessary to say a few words about American football in general. Football in America means this: the very largest stadium, the very largest congregation of people and automobiles in one place, the very loudest noise that can be emitted through the oral cavity of a certain creature with two hands, two legs, one head, and one hat put on a slant. It means the very largest appropriation of money, a special football press and a special football literature, stories, novelettes, and novels of football life. A big football match in America is an event of much greater significance than a concert by a symphony orchestra, a cyclone in Florida, a war in Europe, or even the kidnapping of a famous millionaire's daughter. The grandstands of the stadium, filled in the centre, were almost vacant on the ends. Still, there were approximately 30,000 people there. At first, the play seemed incomprehensible and, therefore, not interesting. American football has nothing in common with European football. These games resemble each other so little that when in New York, in a newsreel theatre, a portion of a football match between two European teams was shown, there was laughter in the audience. And so, for some time, we could not understand what was going on the field. People in leather helmets, looking a bit like sea divers, some of them in red, others in white, stood facing each other, their heads and backs bent, and for several seconds kept standing, without moving. Then a whistle blew, and these people dashed frantically away from their places. The reds and the whites got mixed up, as it seemed to us, seizing each other by their legs. Such a commotion occurs in a chicken coop when a polecat appears. Then they all fell on top of each other, forming a large pile of bodies in motion. The first few minutes we did not even see the ball, that is, we noticed it but only for a second or two, and then again we lost sight of it. Gradually we learned to follow the ball and to estimate the situation. By the end of the first quarter we began to understand a little about American football, and by the end of the second quarter we were already great experts, repeated the names of the best players, and yelled with all the other onlookers. It is terrible to say it right out, but Hollywood, whose fame has gone around the world hundreds of times, Hollywood, about which in the last 20 years more books have been written than in 200 years about Shakespeare, the great Hollywood, on whose firmament stars rise and fall 1,000,000 times faster than astronomers have told us about, of whom dream hundreds of thousands of girls in all ends of the terrestrial globe. This Hollywood is dull. Hellishly dull, and if a yawn continues several seconds in any small American town, here it stretches into a full minute, and there are times when one simply cannot muster enough strength to close his mouth. There you sit, your eyes squinting with boredom, your mouth wide open, like a trapped lion. Hollywood is a correctly planned, excellently paved, and finely lighted city in which live 300,000 people. All these 300,000 either work in the motion picture industry or serve those who work in it. We, Moscow theatre patrons, are somewhat spoiled by American cinematography. That which reaches Moscow and is shown to a small number of cinema specialists at nightly previews is almost always the best that Hollywood creates. Moscow has seen the pictures of Louis Milestone, King Vidor, Reuben Macmullian, and John Ford. Cinematographic Moscow has seen the best pictures of the best directors. These directors, with the exception of Chaplin, who releases one picture in several years, make 5, 8, 10 pictures a year. But, as we already know, Americans shoot 800 pictures a year. All the more depressing, therefore, was the impression American cinematography left with us
after we became acquainted with it in its own native land. In New York, we went to the motion picture theaters almost every evening. Usually 2 feature pictures are shown during one performance. Thus, we must have seen more than 100 feature pictures alone. All these pictures are below the level of human dignity. It seems to us that it is degrading for a human being to look at such pictures. They're designed for birds' brains, for slow-thinking human cattle of camel-like lack of fastidiousness. Every evening we would enter a motion picture theatre with a vestige of hope, and departed with the feeling of having eaten in all its detail the famous lunch number 2, of which we were duly sick and tired. However, the spectators, the most ordinary American garage mechanics, salesgirls, storekeepers, liked these pictures. At first we wondered about it, later we were worried about it, and then we began to understand how it all came about. There are 4 main standard types of pictures: musical comedy, historical drama, a film of bandit life, and a film featuring some famous opera singer. Each of these standard types has only one plot, which is varied endlessly and tiringly. American spectators see one and the same thing year in and year out. They've become so accustomed to it that if they were presented with a picture that had a new plot, they would undoubtedly burst into tears, like the child from whom his favourite toy had been taken, though it was old and broken. For several days we toured the studios. On the territory of the studio, an entire city is built. It is the strangest city in the world. From a typical street in a small American town with a garage and a 5 and 10 cent store, we walked out onto a Venetian square. Right behind the palace of the Doge could be seen a Russian inn. All the decorations are made to look like the original. Several steps away you cannot believe that these monumental entrances into cathedrals, these coal mines, ocean ports, bankers' offices, Paraguayan villages, are made out of beaver board, coloured paper and plaster of Paris. We walked out of the studio, and half an hour later were slowly rolling along with the automobile flood which was making its way to Santa Monica to breathe the ocean air. The great motion picture capital smelled of petrol and fried ham. Young girls in bright flannel trousers were busily walking the sidewalks. All the girls of the world congregate in Hollywood. Here the very freshest merchandise is needed. Crowds of those who had not yet become rising stars, beautiful girls with unpleasant, spiteful eyes, fill the city. Here we saw a man whose profession is, in all probability, inimitable. This man sat under a large striped umbrella. Beside him was placed the following billboard: Houses of Motion Picture Stars, from 9 a.m. until 5:30 p.m. Although the business day was at its height, no one engaged the guide, and on his face was expressed an irrepressible disgust for his foolish profession and for American motion pictures. Further on, we saw a young man standing in the middle of the pavement. On his chest hung a placard which read, "I am hungry. Give me work." No one walked up to this man either. The vastness of the ocean, the steady wind that blew towards the shore, the tranquil pounding of the surf, reminded us that in this world there is still life that is real, with real emotions, which do not necessarily fall within a set quantity of footage, filled with tap dancing, kisses, and gunshots. In America there are many religions and many gods. Millions of people want to believe in something, so scores of mighty church organizations offer them their services. The old and, if one may say so, the European religions suffer because of a certain abstraction. Let them stay in Europe, on that old and decrepit continent. In America, side by side with skyscrapers, electric washing machines and other attainments of the age, they somehow pale into insignificance. Los Angeles, in translation, means City of Angels. Yes, it is a city of angels, smeared in oil. Here, as in Oklahoma City, the oil was found in the city itself, and entire streets are occupied by metal derricks. They tap, pump, make money. Los Angeles is a ponderous city with large buildings, dirty and populous streets, iron fire escapes which stick out the facades of the houses. This is a California Chicago. Brick, slums, the realest kind of poverty, and the most revolting wealth. We circled in our automobile around the restaurant we had selected without finding a place where we could park our car. Looking for a place to park, we drove further and further away from our restaurant, migrating from street to street. But the city was so full of automobiles that we could not find a place for just one more little, respectable, mouse-coloured automobile. We drove to the very end, where even the noises of the city did not reach, and in the darkness we heard only the roar of the ocean. Here we finally parked and went to a restaurant. We had to walk a half hour to it. This is what happens occasionally in a country where there are 25 million automobiles. In the restaurant, holding onto a fork of a large piece of pale Christmas turkey, Mr. Adams solemnly exclaimed, "Now, gentlemen, we have come to the very end of the United States. We cannot go any further. From now on, no matter what we do, no matter where we go, we are going home, to New York. We have already driven 6,000 miles. Hurrah!" Tired, we got into our trusty automobile, which again raced off with us. The quiet roar of the motor and the measured roar of the gravel under our fenders lulled us to sleep. We drowsily shook our heads, and even Mr. Adams became thoughtful. But we were awakened from the silence that suddenly overtook us. The machine was standing. We discovered that a hitchhiker was asking us to take him. We took him, and we were sorry at once. He talked like a drunkard. "War is coming," he announced, stuttering uninterruptedly, swallowing phrases and syllables. "The young people want to fight. They've got to have something to do. They need some kind of work and fame. There is no work. The machines have taken it from people. It wouldn't be a bad thing to destroy at least part of those accursed machines." We'd heard this many times by now. To set things right, it was a good thing to kill part of the people in war and to destroy a part of the machines. Then everything will again go smoothly. "Mexicans," said our fellow traveller in his drunken voice, "like to live in dirt. No matter how much money they earn, they will always be dirty. That's the kind of people they are. Give them $5 a week, give them even $5 a day. It will do no good." It was easy for our hitchhiker to live with such views. Everything was easily solved. Part of the people must be killed, part of the machines must be destroyed. And if there are any poor people, it is because they are a special kind of people. They like to live in poverty, all those Mexicans and Poles. The South was approaching. The last mile separating us from Louisiana, we drove through forests. The sun looked out. It was warm and joyous, as in the springtime in the Ukraine. Finally, we passed the little post with the inscription, "State of Louisiana," and raced alongside reddish fields of harvested cotton. The monumental churches of the east and the west were succeeded by wooden, whitewashed little churches on poles instead of foundations. Spanish and Indian names were succeeded by French names. We drove up to a large river. In the twilight it gleamed like metal. "Mississippi!" exclaimed Mr. Adams. "This is not the Mississippi," said Mrs. Adams calmly. "This is the Mississippi." "This is not the Mississippi." "Becky, it depresses me to hear you say that this is not the Mississippi."
Nevertheless, it is not the Mississippi. Mr. Adams groaned. We drove across the bridge and found ourselves in Morgan City. Before going off to look for a night's lodging, we stopped at a restaurant called the Blue Goose to have our dinner. "Sir," asked Mr. Adams of the proprietor, winking an eye, "what is the name of that river? I know what it is, but my wife would like to know." "This is the Atchafalaya," replied the proprietor. "Sorry, what?" "Atchafalaya." Thank you. Very, very," muttered Mr. Adams, backing out. "Very, very." It was only 100 miles to New Orleans. On a sunny morning we started on our journey. It was soft, almost summery weather. In the course of several hours we met the monotonous and pathetic board huts of the black farm workers. Here was the devastating monotony of limitless poverty, a kind of standard of poverty. In the doorless entrances, almost falling apart, one could see not only no cows, pigs or chickens, but not even a wisp of straw. This was the very lowest stage of poverty, before which the picturesque poverty of the Indians may seem the height of well-being, even of luxury. This was in South United States, in one of the most fruitful places on the globe. Before us again appeared a large, smooth and completely deserted river, which reminded us of the Volga, although perhaps not so broad. "This is the Mississippi," said Mrs. Adams, triumphantly. Mr. Adams sighed heavily. He would have paid a high price that that river should bear some other name. We were driving into New Orleans. New Orleans might have been called the American Venice. After all, like Venice, it has risen out of water if its innumerable canals had not been hidden underground. In honour of the unseen canal, the main street is called Canal Street. It divides the city into two parts. The French, which is as careless as old Paris, with its little streets, its small arches on thin wooden posts, its stores, its restaurants of unprepossessing appearance with first-class French cooking, its port inns, cobbled streets, and street stands filled with vegetables and fruits, the beauty of which stands out particularly thanks to the proximity of dirt and slops thrown right out into the street. And the new, American part, which adds nothing to the character of the American cities already known to the readers. The further we moved through the southern states, the more frequently we met with all kinds of limitations designed for the black population. Sometimes they were separate comfort stations, or a special bench at an autobus stop, or a special section of the streetcar. Here, even the churches were separate, for example, one for white Baptists and another for the black Baptists. When the Baptist God, several years hence, returns to Earth in order to destroy Soviet atheists who help one another, he will be delighted with his establishments in the south of America. Our further route lay along the Gulf of Mexico, through the states of Louisiana, Mississippi, and Alabama. We met black people with more and more frequency. At times, for several hours at a stretch, we saw no white people. But in the cities, the white man ruled, and if a black person appeared at some moss-covered mansion in the residential part, he would invariably have a broom, a pail, or a package, all of which pointed to the fact that here he could be only a servant. And yet the soul of the South is its people, not its white people, but its black. Speaking now of white people, we have in view these southern gentlemen, and not them only, but also the gentlemen from the north, who are likewise infected with the psychology of slave-owning. We also want to say that not all the people in the South regard black people as lower beings, but to our regret, these are the majority. True to our rule to take into the automobile people waiting for the occasion on the road, at an isolated petrol station in North Carolina we picked up an 18-year-old boy from a CCC camp near Washington. These camps had been built by President Roosevelt for unemployed young men, originally for 6 months. Roosevelt hoped to end unemployment in 6 months, but later, when it became clear that it was not so easy to end unemployment, the camps were left for an indefinite period. Quite a cold rain was pouring. His story was ordinary. His father was a farmer. The old man's affairs were not so good. The boy graduated from a high school. He didn't have enough money to go to college. He set out to look for a job. He did not find it.
We were passing through a black village. "You can tell a black man's house right away from a white man's house," our fellow traveller said with a smile. We replied, "How does it happen then that all the black people are poor?" "I don't know about that." "Is your father acquainted with any black people?" "We know many." "And you treat them well?" "Of course." "Would you ask such a black person to sit down at the table with your family?" The youth laughed. "No, that's impossible." "But why?" "Well, because black and white people cannot sit together at the same table." "But why not?" "You must be from New York," said the young man. "To the Southern mind, New York is the limit of free thinking and radicalism." Not only here, but even in New York itself, about which the young boy from the South talked with such horror, it is almost impossible to see a black person in a restaurant, a motion picture theatre, or a church, unless of course he is there as a servant or a porter. By law, black people are free citizens of the United States, yet in the South, under various pretexts, they are deprived of the right to vote. And in Washington itself, and not alone Washington, but in the very building where the laws were written, the following occurred. A black man by the name of DePriest was elected to Congress from the city of Chicago. To the disaffection of the white congressman, he sat beside them at the sessions of the House of Representatives. But that wasn't all. This black man, with his black secretary, went to eat in the congressional dining room. He could not be turned out, and he paid no attention, whatever, to the quiet demonstrations against him. Finally, they thought of an excellent way out of the situation. They closed the dining room. They closed down entirely the congressional dining room, just so that the black man would not be able to eat with the white people. And so, after making 10,000 miles, we found ourselves in the capital of the United States. Washington, with its comparatively low government buildings, its gardens, its monuments, its broad streets, looks somewhat like Vienna, somewhat like Berlin, somewhat like Warsaw, somewhat like all the capitals. And only automobiles remind one that this city is located in America. Here there is an automobile for every 2 persons, but there is not a single permanent theatre for the entire population of 500,000. Having looked over George Washington's house in Mount Vernon, having visited sessions of Congress, and having been at the grave of the unknown soldier, we discovered that there was nothing else really to see. Only the president remained to be seen. And in America, that is not so difficult. Twice a week at 10 o'clock in the morning, the President of the United States receives journalists. We managed to come to such a reception. It took place in the White House. Gradually, about 100 people gathered. They smoked, talked aloud, and looked impatiently at the small white door behind which, apparently, the President of the United States was sequestered. Finally, the door opened, and the journalists, crowding each other, rushed ahead. We ran with the rest of them. Before us, in the depths of a circular private study, on the walls of which hung old lithographs depicting Mississippi steamers, and in the small niches of which stood models of frigates, at a medium-sized writing desk, a smoking cigarette in his hand, and Chekhovian pince-nez on his large, handsome nose, sat Franklin D. Roosevelt, President of the United States. Behind his back twinkled the stars and stripes of 2 national flags. Questions began. The correspondents asked them. The president answered. All of this ritual was, of course, somewhat conditional. Everybody knows that the president will not disclose any particular secrets to the journalists. Certain questions the president answered seriously and quite extensively, parried some with a jest. It is not so easy, of course, twice a week to get off with a joke against 100 pushing journalists. To still others, he replied that he would discuss them next time. Roosevelt's large, handsome face looked tired. Only the day before, the Supreme Court had vetoed the AAA, Roosevelt's law regulating farmers' sowing of crops, one of the pivots of his program. The questions and answers took up to half an hour. There resounded a helter-skelter, "Goodbye, Mr. President," and everybody departed. And Mr. President remained alone in his circular study, among the frigates and the star-spangled banners.
our journey came to an end. Within 2 months, we had been in 25 states and several hundred towns. We had breathed the dry air of deserts and prairies and crossed the Rocky Mountains, had seen Indians, had talked with the young unemployed, with the old capitalists, with radical intellectuals, with revolutionary workers, with poets, with writers, with engineers. We had travelled 10,000 miles, and throughout that entire journey, we never once stopped thinking of the Soviet Union. We had travelled over American highways, but in our thoughts were Soviet highways. We spent nights in American hotels, but we thought about Soviet hotels. We examined Ford's factories, but in our thoughts we saw ourselves in our own automobile factories, and while conversing with Indians we thought of Kazakhstan. It is necessary to see the capitalist world in order to appreciate in a new way the world of socialism. The average American cannot endure abstract conversations, nor does he touch upon themes too far removed from him. He is interested only in what is directly connected with his house, his automobile, or his nearest neighbours. He shows an interest in the life of the country once in every 4 years, at the time of the presidential election. We do not at all insist that this absence of spirituality is an organic attribute of the American people. It is capitalism that has made these people thus, and in every way it nurtures in them this spiritual lassitude. Terrible are the crimes of American capitalism, which with amazing trickiness has palmed off on the people the most trivial of motion pictures, radio, and weekly journalistic tosh, while reserving for itself Tolstoy, Van Gogh, and Einstein, but remaining profoundly indifferent to them. At the foundation of life of the Soviet Union lies the communist idea. We have a definite goal toward which the country advances. America does not know what will happen with it tomorrow. We know, and we can tell with definite accuracy what will happen with us 50 years from now. And we can say honestly, with hand on heart, that we would not like to live in America. It is interesting to observe this country, but one does not care to live in it. In New York, we boarded the steamer. The huge bulk of the Majestic had already left the pier, and we heard for the last time, "Goodbye, gentlemen. Seriously, I hope that you have understood what America is." And over the heads of the people at the pier frantically waved the trusty old hat of Mr. Adams and the handkerchief of his wife, who twice drove us across the entire continent, the never-tiring, patient, ideal fellow traveller of the road. When the Majestic sailed past Wall Street, darkness fell, and lights appeared in the skyscrapers. In those windows gleamed the gold of electricity, but perhaps also real gold. This last golden vision of America escorted us to the very egress into the ocean. The Majestic gathered speed. The farewell light of a buoy flashed by, and a few hours later, there was not a trace left of America. The cold January wind blew a large ocean wave